Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts, Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in this space. This week, it's episode 7 of season 3. We're going to have a chat around Azure Stack, a way for organizations to extend Azure capabilities to the edge, the data center, and to your on premise environments. Hey, Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, I'm not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. I think you gave me the stat that we're a third of the way through this podcast season. So yeah, we're absolutely smashing through it, right? Time's flying by.
Yeah, I can't believe we've done, or would have done by the end of this episode, 7.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
yeah, it is. Yeah, and like we said before, it's just part of the routine now, right? It's just get on, record the podcast, and yeah, it's definitely working really well. And we can see from the stats that there's lots of people listening in, and we've got good growth. So yeah, we'll just continue continue on, and see how it goes. Okay, so this week, as I mentioned in the intro, we're taking a first look, I'll call it, at Azure Stack. I'm going to be sort of driving this one, but Azure Stack is not an area. And Alan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that neither me nor Alan have much experience in. That's for sure, because day to day, hybrid infrastructure isn't. I wouldn't say is our focus, is it, Alan?
No, no, definitely not. We're more the cloud guys. Or,
Yeah, exactly. We're definitely living in sort of cloud first land. But what I think is, and we have done some episodes on, on premise versus the cloud and things like that. And I think one area that, because of our experience and what we deal with day to day, we don't really get involved in um, hybrid environments, right? And I think what's really interesting is with Azure Stack is that there's a collection of tools that can possibly help, help with that, right? And it was only by chance that I happened to see I think it was a YouTube video about Azure Stack pop up in my feed. I watched it and I was like, what is this? I have to know more. So I spent too much time looking into it because a lot of these solutions are, I'll call it like paywalled behind system integrators and sort of enterprisey sort of hardware requirements. So we probably won't be able to give you any nuggets of Azure Stack day to day operational knowledge, but I think it was worth doing an episode on it because we all get to learn about things that we maybe wouldn't ever see day to day, right?
yeah, and you're right. We might not know about it, and some of our listeners might not know about it, and then all of a sudden, someone, maybe it might fit a scenario they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think one of the biggest challenges of Azure in general for me is just the breadth of capability that's there, right? And understanding all of the edges of that capability as well. And so, and if you are an Azure Stack engineer, consultant, architect, I apologize if we if we get anything wrong. But yeah, let's get started.
Okay, then. So I guess the obvious first question there, Sam, is what is Azure Stack?
Okay, so if we just put if we okay, let's set the scene of sort of hybrid environments, right? Yeah, let's talk about traditional IT might be on premise or might be in a data center. And now we have cloud platforms where it is possible to move workloads into a cloud environment. So you effectively say, let's say you've got a virtual machine. Um, you've got a virtual machine on your one of your in on-premise servers, and when your hardware refresh comes up, you might decide, I'm not going to invest in a hardware refresh. I'm going to move that virtual machine to the cloud. And what you then do is you take away a lot of the infrastructure operations away from that. So, security, power, well, physical security, I should say, physical security, power, cooling, hardware. You take a lot of the responsibilities away from you, and you pay for Microsoft to take those responsibilities on. From a software and a security perspective, there is shared responsibility, so you're not completely isolated from any sort of responsibility, but it can help with that. And that's okay if the workload that you've got fits the cloud model, and it makes, a lot of the time it makes commercial sense, if it makes commercial sense to put it into the cloud. You might also have things like regulatory restrictions. Maybe you're in a highly regulated field. Maybe you're in defense, national infrastructure, government. You may have data residency restrictions, data sovereignty issues and concerns, where you may want to keep some workloads on premise. So it's not always, you know, quick, hybrid, hybrid compute 101. It's not always simple to simply, move your workloads into Azure, and we see that quite a lot, don't we, Alan? There is still it's still reasonable to expect that some workloads um, aren't ready for the cloud, or may never be able to go to cloud because of regulatory compliance.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely regulatory compliance and data sovereignty. Sovereignty is definitely one of the main ones for not going to the cloud, as well as uh, potentially cost as well, and or the view of a different cost model is probably fair to say, and
Yeah.
understanding all of those costs.
Yeah, definitely. But I think one thing that we can, I could probably pretty confidently say, is that the management experience and configuration experience from, say, the Azure portal, for resources is a great place to be. So what Azure Stack is attempting to do, and there's sort of three discrete areas, and we'll go through those in Azure Stack, because it's more of a group of solutions than it is one singular solution. What it's aiming to do is to add the benefit of the Azure management plane to those hybrid scenarios. And there's sort of three different levels. There's sort of a more simplistic, medium, and then sort of enterprise level sort of Azure Stack deployment. There's three areas there. We will go through those, and you can effectively decide which of those could potentially work for you. And again, it's an extension of Azure capability. So it's, I wouldn't say, from my perspective, it's not a hard and fast requirement, because there is good hardware and software to manage those on premise and data center scenarios. But what we'll see with Azure Stack is, if you if you are happy, or you can cloud connect them, you can pick up a lot of management and control niceties and deployment niceties by doing so.
So that's kind of talking around potentially bringing in a single place for management against on premise and your Azure cloud sort of scenarios.
Yeah, I kind of see it as, we talk about sort of together as one from the Defender suite and security, right? Trying to advocate away from point solutions in security, and having one singular, security identity, and access control plane. I kind of see that the same for this infrastructure. Have one place to manage things. And not have lots of disparate areas that you, and maybe potential technologies that you have to have the technical education and experience inside of your organization to manage, right? Because we've seen it from, say, Arc connected, virtual machines, you get you get a very similar. You don't. It's not a similar experience, but you get a familiar experience to straight virtual machines in Azure, right? It's not the same thing, but it's presented in the same way, right? It's easier to understand that the extension of the portal in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you talked about 3 products within Azure Stack. What are they? 'Cause you haven't actually mentioned what they are. You just said there's 3 of them.
Okay, yeah. So let me start off with the first one, Azure Stack Edge, um, and this is an interesting one. And if I think about um, m- small, medium, and large in terms of deployments, um, when I say small, I don't mean like this isn't true like edge or IoT computing. These are still like real machines with decent specifications. But Microsoft actually, from a deployment perspective, they actually market it as a hardware as a service, right? So it's a fully uh, like integrated appliance that you effectively rent um, through a subscription, right? So there's a few different there's a few different like SKUs to it. So you got the Pro. There's the Pro and the Pro 2, and both of those are sort of rack mount units, right? The Pro is like a larger sort of 1U rack mountable appliance. Like a really deep rack mountable, like a real server sort of size thing. And then the Pro 2, I think, is 2U. Yeah, I think it's 2U, and it's slightly shorter. So maybe that's for ease of deployment. And both of them have like powerful specifications. Like the Pro is 40 vCPUs with 102 gig of RAM. The Pro 2 has less vCPUs, so 32 vCPUs, and then it has 64, 128 gig, 256 gig of RAM, and they both have the ability to have NVIDIA GPUs placed inside them as well. So they're sort of like more traditional, like rack mountable like units, and then they do the Pro R, which stands for ruggable, and so that rugged, sorry, and that is effectively like like a server chassis like wrapped in like a protective cage. We're on a podcast, so I can't show you a picture, unfortunately. And then there's the Mini R, which is like, it kind of looks like, if you've ever seen like is it a Tough Book, like was it a Toshiba Tough Book like you used to get? I think Dell do them as well. It looks like a Tough Book laptop with its screen closed, and then it's got like bumpers on the edge of it for like true, out in the field, like deployments. And we usually do pricing at the end, but I'm going to talk about pricing a little bit here, because I'm not going to talk about all the SKUs because they all, it depends where you ship them to and things like that. But I'll just work through a couple of them. So the Mini R, which is like the tiniest little like rugged deployment model. The monthly service fee on that is $1,400 basically, and to get it shipped out, it's $50 to get it shipped to America. EMEA is $200, and so on, and things like that. So as far as I can see, you don't buy the appliance; you just rent it for a monthly fee, right? So it literally is hardware as a service. And when I looked through the pricing, if you don't return it, you have to pay like a penalty fee, like a non-return fee, or if you break it, there's different things in and around that. And what was really interesting is the Edge Pro 2, which is like the 2U but slightly shorter rack mount device. The 64 gig of RAM one is only $399 a month, which I don't really get, because I would assume the smaller rugged one, and that is also battery operated. That rugged one as well, so you can actually truly like take it into the field. So I forgot to mention that. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a bit crazy. Yeah,
I think you'll find, because it's the same thing as you sort of mentioned, the Toshiba rugged laptops. Previous lives I've seen those, and they are, for what they are, they are crazy expensive. But theory is you can run them over
yeah,
and they won't break and things like that. So you can
yeah,
imagine how much effort's been put into this to make, well, not necessarily a tank running over it. I mean, it might be at that grade, but you know, it's going to be able to be thrown from a
yeah,
height or something. So
yeah.
just definitely just sound like it's out in a field somewhere.
Yeah, and I assume that they must get beaten up quite a lot, right? They are designed to be, out in literally the field, right? So it might also be that, you know, their average life expectancy is a lot lower potentially, right? Um, yeah, and then you can add a singular GPU, or you can have two GPUs, and there's a couple of extra SKUs in there as well. But I'm not going to go through all of those. But effectively, you're just paying for hardware as a service. So, um, if so, we've got this, and this seems a bit weird considering this is an Azure podcast. We've got an appliance, right? Which is not really the point of Azure, I suppose, right? But what can you do on it? So there's a there's multiple different workloads that are supported. So um, machine one of the big, and why there is a GPU accelerated SKUs, is we're talking about machine learning at the edge. So, so we're not talking about potentially training your machine learning models, but once you've developed your machine, you've trained your machine learning models, and you want to run them at the edge, accelerated. Um, maybe you've got um, a machine learning model that you want to run in, maybe your factory, really close to the edge. You don't want to stream, let's say your data feed from what you are processing with your machine learning model is so high throughput that you couldn't possibly uh, spit that to the cloud and then process it there, and run those models there. So here we have a managed environment in order to run that. um you can you can there's an IoT solution on board as well, to effectively aggregate IoT data that's coming in, and processing it locally. So filtering it, processing it, and then you can obviously store what you need on the cloud. And the way I kind of see this is like a remote um, data collection rule, right? Like, as in being able to filter down that IoT data, maybe act on it locally as well, and push up your results, what you need there. It can also act as a storage gateway. um, so it can be used as like a middle stop to cloud storage. So devices connect to the Azure Stack Edge device to store data there, and that then pushes data up into Azure at a throttled frequency that works for you. Um, maybe you're a science lab, and you have like maybe gigabytes of data that you want to store, but maybe the right time to process that storage is overnight. So use a storage gateway locally to then push to the cloud at times, when it's best suited. um, they can support compute. I'll talk about compute in a little bit more detail about some specific workloads, but running local applications actually at the edge, like not in Azure. And the big focus again that we've already talked about is around regulatory compliance. Um, are you allowed to send that data into potentially a public cloud? And that doesn't, I'm not saying that it's just publicly accessible. I mean, it's not an environment that you maybe control. It might not be a private cloud, or you might have some regulatory compliance uh, legislation that you have to deal with. And so this is a way to get that technology right out to you. Okay. So I believe once you get your device, I'm not sure about the onboarding, but you effectively can cloud connect it at that point and get management from Azure portal to the device. I believe you can manage it locally as well. Um, so when we are in the portal, we can deploy different edge services. So we can do things like um, Windows Server VMs, Linux VMs, and you can also do Azure Kubernetes service. I'm not going to go too much into like the specific solutions and integrations there, um, because I'm going to talk about Azure Stack HCI next, and that will give you a really good idea about what is actually available there. You also get the Windows Admin Center UI as well. Alan, did you say you also get that with Azure Arc? Don't you? The connection
Yeah,
to like Windows Server Admin Center. Could you just talk to us about what that does from an Arc perspective?
yeah. So Azure Arc, in effect, gives that sort of we kind of talked about earlier, but a lightweight management agent to a on premise um, virtual machine. That could be on a hypervisor. That's not any of these Azure Stack ones, but or it could be a physical machine at this point as well. But when it creates that connection within Azure and the Azure VMs, you're able to use the Windows Admin Center to do some of that day to day stuff without having to log on to it. See what roles are installed, what the the high level, what's happening with it. Um, Microsoft sort of introduced that you can go via the Azure Arc because it's in effect, it's there managing it. So why not? So it means that you can do I'd say lightweight management of it into Azure, into the on-premise machine or data center. Um, I mean, Azure Arc does other things because like you can bring down like Azure Policy, Defend for Cloud can come down on over to it, and um, we can do data collection rules for Azure Monitor as well. So there's other bits that bring some of the functionality in Azure to a a machine in a data center or on premise, but not doesn't do anything else around the hypervisor part of it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's what we're seeing here with, Azure Stack Edge. We're seeing uh, I'm going to say like a vertically integrated, hardware appliance that gives you, I mean, not obviously not the full set of compute resources and services that are available from Azure, but a lot of a lot of core um, solutions that will enable you to do a lot more edge based computing, but also with that management connection back to Azure, right? So and I got you to explain Azure Arc because if you are a listener and you have used Arc before, from what I have seen of Stack Edge, that is a very similar experience, right? That's utilized. So if you're familiar with Arc and you happen to come across Stack Edge, I don't personally think there's going to be too much, far away from that experience.
So so I guess this is taking effect as well. I kind of sort of said it, but this is taking away the having to manage the hypervisor part of it, isn't it? Because that's all done via Azure or the interface that you may get locally. But in effect, it's just the portal. You say what you want, and then it builds it for you. There's no I have to spin up a VM or anything. It's just done by the either Azure telling the appliance to do it or locally.
Yeah, that's from what I'm seeing because uh, yeah, and obviously you physically got the device, haven't you? Right.
Hmm.
But the management of, I assume, the operating system and what's on it is either going to be it might be driven by you, but it's probably completely controlled by that software stack, right? Because you might, I don't know, because I haven't put one in and I haven't managed it, but my assumption is that you would just patch it, not the underlying, like the underlying operating system is, transparent to you, right? You're just running, this appliance that, yeah, that may
Yes,
need to be updated, right?
it's kind of taking a bit of that a small amount of the responsibility away from you. You've still got to do the power, the cooling, the
Exactly.
electric, etc. But you've the operating system or the hypervisor part is then sort of not owned, but is secured and managed by Microsoft and its patching processes.
Yeah, and apparently the Mini R1 can be mounted, like it can be put in a backpack. So if anybody's ever used it in that sort of configuration, please send me a picture because I'd absolutely love to see to see that happening.
Have you got any stats on how heavy it is? Because I don't know if I'd
No,
want to carry
I
it.
didn't. No, I haven't. I'm still on this weekend because what I like to do is I like to this is a bit nerdy, but like every weekend I like to open the docs and just find like a new bit of Azure that I've never looked at before. And a few weeks ago, it was like the turn of Azure Stack, and as I kept reading, it was just like more and more like insane what you could actually do. And this is why this podcast episode happened, because I just can't believe you can run like a, I'm going to call it like an Azure node on your backpack, battery powered. Like I could just, it's just, yeah, I can imagine, like I don't know what they call it in Bing Maps, but like Street View. There's probably a different name for it, right? I don't know. I could just imagine, because you see like the Google Maps operators, they've got backpacks, haven't they, that they use, and they've got like a big camera above their head. I just imagine that the the people that do the Bing Maps have got exactly the same camera, but they've got a mini R like IoT edge, like taking all the pictures, crunching them, and then just sending like the output back into Azure. It's probably not that cool, but like I'd absolutely love to see that, for sure. Okay, let's move on to Azure Stack HCI next. Um, and I would say Azure Stack HCI takes the, I'm going to call it like pro, the production level up a notch in my opinion. And what I'll do is I'll continually reuse an example that I saw about retail deployments of Kubernetes enabled apps, right? Because I didn't really realize how retail uh, retail like shops, restaurants, and cafes, especially with like large chains, have such disconnected challenges. Because you've effectively got potentially thousands of different locations that have computing requirements, and some of those environments can be very harsh, right? Like actually physically visiting those sites and doing IT at those like locations can be a big challenge because they could be physically located far away, across the world basically. So I'll use that as we go through because I think that's a really good example of where HCI is really really powerful. So it's all built on validated partner hardware, and I think that I'm going to start there because that's important for the rest of this vertical integration. On top of it, you have Azure Stack HCI operating system, so which I think is just Windows Server, but okay, because it has Hyper-V, it has a storage spaces direct and software defined networking on top of it. And then on top of that, you have the hypervisor level, which provides you Windows servers, virtual machines, Linux server virtual machines, and Azure Kubernetes service. Then you have the Windows Admin Center UI, and then you have on top of that, a connection into Azure at that point as well. And that stack that I've just, bottom to top stack that I've just described is the whole Azure Stack HCI solution. Um, and really the big push for this is Azure Kubernetes service and cloud containerized apps essentially being run at the edge. So um the 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 Azure Stack HCI nodes are apparently a small form factor machine. I couldn't actually find an example machine, right, of what it is, but it's apparently supposed to be, they should be small nodes so they can be deployed in, non like data center environments, basically. Um, they're performance optimized because they're actually running like local workloads at the edge. Um, and what you can also do is you can run other different types of workloads. So let's just go through those workloads because I think that's really really important. So let's start with some of the more um, well. Let's start with the more non-compute based ones. Is probably the best. So you can virtualize applications like SQL Server on it as well. You can do virtual desktop infrastructure locally as well using RDS, which I thought was interesting because I assume that a lot of those environments they still may use on-premise virtual desktop infrastructure. And what you can also do is, like I've said, virtual machines. So let's just talk about the virtual machine experience. So the virtual machine images, you can either use Azure Marketplace images, or you can build your own images, like you can with in Azure. It even has virtual machine extensions like Azure, and you can have sort of total flexibility of each of those virtual machines. You know how many vCPUs they've got, how much memory, what their networking and their storage is. So and when you deploy these virtual machines, you effectively just deploy them. You can just deploy them from the portal, and the management blades for them are very similar to the virtual machine management blades in Azure itself. So you get you get this ability to remotely create virtual machine deployments. Um, but I'll come back to workloads in a second because I do just want to talk about some of the other integrations. So a big push in this area is Kubernetes clusters, and what they're effectively promoting is you deploy a Kubernetes cluster to each of these remote nodes. You've got full Linux support and full Kubernetes support, but then you've also got Azure AD integration into there. So you can for access to the Kubernetes clusters, you can use Azure AD identities inside of it. So you're not also from an identity perspective, you're not replicating separate identity structures on each of these nodes. These are cloud connected, and Azure AD backed nodes, which I thought was really really really
Do,
important.
do you think then that if you may not know because we may not have gone into this so much detail with it, but I'm thinking around, if you had resources running in Azure, real real Azure,
Yeah.
um, and you had a managed identity, do you think that you could in effect use that managed identity to access those Kubernetes? Do you? I
The
guess it's a
the
possibility.
exact wording from the documentation that I picked up and copied in is use your existing identities in RBAC for cluster access.
There you go.
So, what scope that goes to and the types of identities, I can't say, but my assumption is that it phones home for you know that level of access, right? So I I don't know, but it sounds like it's very
So,
tightly integrated with AAD.
so it kind of feels like this might be that if you're on a journey from an identity perspective to maybe move away from Active Directory, and don't get me wrong, that is a long journey. It's not a overnight thing. Um, that it's the way to start bringing some of those services into Azure AD and have them physically near you as well.
So I've obviously I've talked about retail Kubernetes workload scenario, right? But I have also seen HCI being used to let's call it refresh on-premise workloads. So as you refresh your hardware, you you could refresh into HCI hardware instead of other sort of traditional solutions. You then pick up the tightly integrated like virtualization stack that HCI gives you, which is from what we can see just Windows, like what you'd probably be using anyway, potentially using, if you're Hyper-V. But what you also get is you get the effectively Arc connected cloud, you know, um, management, right? And we see this where people are arcing their on-premise environments,
Mm.
right? To get, well, a lot of the time it's a good communication gateway, isn't it? Arc, right, to back into Azure. Um, but imagine if you could actually properly manage those machines remotely, and get even tighter integrations into them. Um, push virtual machines to them, push configuration to them, and do all of that. You get a level of control that you don't really get with traditional, virtualized hosts, right?
Yeah, and I think you've got to think about how you manage, because bear in mind this might be a remote, you know, data center that maybe from another country you're dealing with, another region that you're working in, and be able to do some of that. Um, you know, some of that management might be difficult, and that actually now you're moving it to Azure where you can access it from anywhere. You don't need VPNs or anything like that to sort of manage it. Might reduce costs that way, and that hypervisor being managed by Azure. If we think about some organizations might be using like VMware maybe to manage that plane, but also things like System Center Virtual Machine Manager to manage the Hyper-V environments as well. And there's a cost to that still.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. So data center consolidation. I've talked about remote or branch office systems, but data center consolidation is definitely a use case, for this solution. What is really good is you get a really tightly sort of vertically integrated hardware management layer. So whereas because I believe you get so with Azure Monitor, you can get monitoring alerts for the actual hardware. So what you can say is, let's say you had a faulty disk inside of your not your virtual machine, your host, I should say. Sorry, I'm in like a cloud connected thing. You can you can look into the clusters that you've got. You've got Windows Admin Center, but it actually goes further onto that to hardware management, because the hardware is provided by these, tightly connected vendors, and it can effectively show you in the Azure portal, like physically which disk, and show you a picture of the front of the server and which disk that you've actually got to go and replace, to do maintenance on it, and those types of things. So you're actually also getting, a hardware view that I've never, I've never even thought would be part of, Azure as well. I did just want to. We're at 38 minutes already, so I'm going to move on to the next one. But I do just want to talk about one
just
thing on the Kubernetes
go on.
side. Sorry, um, because it's effectively Arc connected Kubernetes clusters. You can deploy, once you've got the management like planes on them. You can deploy apps remotely via DevOps. So you can connect. GitHub repositories and do deployments down to these environments. You can also do hybrid deployments. So what you can do is in your connection, you can do a hybrid deployment. So you can test your because it's all containerized applications. You can test your workloads in the cloud, and then you deploy them to the edge in production. not into Azure. So because they are just because all of these things, because they're like Arc connected, they are just resources in Azure. So you can decide where you deploy your application to. So from a DevOps perspective, that from testing to production, that work and deployment, that workflow, because I can imagine that like edge deployments into retail environments must be an absolute nightmare. Is my view on it. Like how do they remote into those boxes? How do they deploy and validate? I can't imagine managing a Kubernetes cluster remotely. Like, I don't know how that would. I assume it's all like point to point. It's all just VP. I don't know. It'd be great to find out if somebody does that, because it sounds complicated.
So, so
Yeah, go on.
just quickly then. So, is this got the same pricing model? Is it hardware, or is it something that you buy the whole hardware and then there's like a fee for the Azure management piece?
Before I tell you that, I've got to tell you just one more thing. Right, I
Okay.
will answer that question though. What is really interesting though is because it is just, they are effectively just resources in Azure at this point. You can use ARM and other deployment methodologies to duplicate your deployments across physical clusters. So if you've got an application, let's say you want to deploy a virtual machine in two places at the same time using the same image. Um, let's say your application was, let's say you created your own VM images for every new version of your software. Let's say that it wasn't Kubernetes. Let's just say it was like a Linux virtual machine, and you just deployed a new, image every time you upgraded. You could manage all of that, and you could create those the virtual machines using ARM in Azure, which is really powerful. I will talk to you about HCI pricing. One second, my link is broken. I'm just gonna pull it up because there's like I think it's like vCore pricing. Just give me 2 seconds. Okay, so I believe that. Okay, so I believe it's based on, there is an uplift on top of the hardware, basically. I believe you
Okay.
buy the hardware, is my, and I could be wrong on that, but I believe you buy the hardware, and then there is so for the host servicing fee, it's £9 per physical core per monthly service fee for the host servicing fee. There is It's actually free if you've got the Azure hybrid benefit as well. And then there's add-on workloads on top. So the only paid one that I can see of that is Windows Server subscription. So for the guest VMs on there, and that's £18 per physical core per month. I assume that's just to enable Windows VM hypervisor. It doesn't say that's per. I don't know if that's per guest. I don't know that part, or if that's just a flat. You've got to pay this to unlock, the support for Windows virtual machine guests. So
Okay. So that's a different model. That's you buy the hardware and then you're buying the management plane in effect.
yes,
So
yeah, really, yeah,
so all your support and stuff goes back to those providers of the hardware sort of thing. So it
yeah.
goes back to them rather than
And
Microsoft.
I assume you like manage that hardware, yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, like as in, the physical in your data center on prem or whatever, right?
Yep.
Um. Okay, so the last one, and the almost, I think this was the one that sort of blew my mind more than anything else, to be totally honest with you. I mean, HCI seems great. I'd love an HCI node at home for sure, but that's not going to happen. So, well, unless anybody out there that's can get me one, 100%. Anyway, so Azure Stack Hub, right? So Azure Stack Hub, if you imagine Azure in your data center, that is pretty much as close as you're going to get with Azure Stack Hub. Now, this is the most enterprisey of the lot, right? So I'm not going to be able to dive into too much like detail here, but I'll give you the high level what's going on here. So Azure Stack Hub is apparently delivered to you directly by the rack by a hardware partner. So you are effectively buying racks of compute, and from what I can see and the terminology that they use, they effectively have a version of Azure Resource Manager, Azure Portal, and all of those, all the all the underlying technologies that drive Azure on those machines. So you can deploy it on premise, and you can deploy it connected to the internet and Azure, and you can also deploy it in completely disconnected environments as well. Um, there are different. They have IaaS, SaaS, and PaaS capabilities. So I'll just name a few. Virtual machines for both Windows and Linux. Azure Web Apps and Function Apps apparently are supported as well. You can run Key Vault on them. Azure Resource Manager runs on top of it. So I assume the API is there as well. Don't know, but I'm guessing so. The Azure Marketplace can run on top of it as well. Containers, and then I think what's most mind-boggling to me is the admin tools that are available to you. So what you can do is you can actually so you can have the concept of regions, and I don't know if we've heard of regions before, but they're kind of like an Azure thing, and that's effectively like having multiple Stack Hub clusters in different regions and like connecting them together, just the same as like the same concept as Azure. It's multi-tenant capable as well. So just as we have tenants in Azure, and you can have what they call plans, which I'm guessing they're just subscription plans, right? Like we've got in Azure. You can do offers as well on them. You've got full RBAC on there as well. And what's really interesting to me is that you can enable extra resource providers that are supported. So things like we've talked about app service, but also SQL databases, MySQL databases, and so you can effectively get a lot more of, I'll call it like standard, Azure solutions actually completely and even disconnected, like on prem, basically. And from what I can see is that like these effectively are completely, um, they get to their full hardware racks that get delivered to you, like pre-installed with everything you need ready to go. I think you have to do like the commissioning and putting in the correct networking and connectivity and all of those things that you need. You can do IoT Hub on it. You can do Kubernetes. You can do event hubs as well. You can have local container registries. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. And what I thought, so I was reading all that and I was like, wow, this is effectively like on-prem Azure. That's what it sounds like to me, with all of the 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 control on top of it. And then I got to the usage and billing section. I was like, why would you need to worry about usage and billing? And then apparently you can run it as a CSP, and you can offer like private cloud services to other organizations as a CSP. So you can effectively, this is how I see it, is as a CSP you run the hardware and then you sell the compute off to other organizations that might need like controlled environments. So Yeah, and there's APIs to get the usage stats of the different tenants and things like that. So it's from what I can see, and I'm not this is just me going through the documentation and spending hours on YouTube trying to work out like what the hell this thing does. Um, it seems like you can also then resell this compute and resource further down the line for other organizations.
Sounds really cool. So it's like some organizations, they can build their own private Azure data centers and regions. Um, you can have it so that you can resell it to other parts of your business. Maybe you've got a central IT and then got other departments there that you could, in effect, like you said, multi-tenant, sell it off, sell different parts to it, so it's correctly built. 'Cause there might be different legal entities at this point as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's a good thing, because like how you might structure Azure for different, like billing cost centers and different departments and things like that. Maybe that's a view for larger organizations, right? Mergers and acquisitions. Like you might have separate tenants for different legal entities and things like that. So yeah, I didn't ever think about it
well,
like that, to be totally honest with you.
yeah, it might be another scenario I'm thinking of in my head. I mean, local authority background is that there are providers that maybe do it for local authority, that they have big data centers in the UK, for example, for local authority that isn't, is managed by not UK people, but we definitely know it's there and it's in a
Yeah,
different sort of
data
control
sovereignty,
mechanism.
right? Yeah, and
Yeah,
and you
um,
effectively have, like, this is a private cloud driven by Azure technology, right? At that point, isn't it? You know,
yeah,
yeah,
and yeah, them building that and then selling it out to the other local authorities or whatever. It might even be like the NHS, maybe something something like that. Um, yeah, that
yeah.
sounds really really
And
interesting.
there is the most exciting thing for us is there is a development kit that you can apparently run not all of the services, and I believe the resource requirements are quite high. Um, but there is a development kit that you can effectively run a sandbox environment of Azure Stack Hub on a machine. So that would be
Yeah, I
interesting, I
think it's
think.
bring your own hardware, isn't it? And here's the image, but I think the requirements sound like they're insane. I think when I last looked,
Yeah.
because I think me and Chris were going to look at it and go, "Oh yeah, this looks cool. Let's get this up. Oh, we can spin up on our PCs."
Yeah, exactly.
No, maybe that old server we've got somewhere might be able to take it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it looks like, so and like I said, with all of these technologies, these aren't, because I know Azure Stack is a discipline in itself, right? All of these different technologies, there are architects and consultants that just do this, day in, day out. Um, so this really isn't in our realm, but I just thought it was why I wanted to bring it up as a podcast episode, and I think I've already said it, but I'm going to say it again, is that without me just stumbling across like effectively a YouTube video, like I would have never even thought about how these for me it's around how these hybrid workloads are managed, and the challenges of managing those hybrid workloads, because that's just not something that from a security perspective what we really have to think about. And I think it gives us good context of what the challenges organizations are facing, right? Because it's not just a simple case of putting everything in Azure. If you've got 100 retail locations, it might not actually be possible to have reliable, decent internet connectivity to each of those locations potentially, right? And run everything remotely and have that dependence on internet connectivity and things like that. So I think, and these solutions to me, I don't know where they sit in the wider marketplace as well, because I haven't looked at anything other than Microsoft. But they, from a like a Azure and Microsoft, integration, they're very tightly coupled with Azure, which adds a lot of value, I think. I can't give you any pricing on Azure Stack Hub because it's just like, hey, talk to us and we'll sort you out, basically.
That's interesting because I was going to say I've been looking at the on the Azure page. It does talk about pricing,
Yeah, so if I just
but I think from the sound of it, it sounds like there's no upfront cost. You pay as you use it. if it's cloud connected. So you can in effect like put the data center in, and Microsoft you'll pay for what you use.
Yeah, but
From what I've seen,
do you not think there would have to be a minimum commit on that? Like,
uh,
because I know they've got the pricing, like they've got like it's £5 for each virtual CPU per month, and but it doesn't talk about RAM or anything like that. So what I couldn't work out is it does say that it's like got no upfront fees, right? But I assume there must be a qualification in, because there's got to be some pretty beefy like hardware that goes in like to these environments, right? It's it's got to be like six figures worth of hardware.
it what it was saying, and I've briefly been looking at this whilst you've been talking about it, is that in effect it is pay as you go, and you can do capacity if it's disconnected. So you can say, I'm going to commit to this on it because they can't get the stats.
Right. Okay.
So, I mean, I guess what you got to think about is if you're not using it, you're consuming a lot of power and cooling just to have something sat there that you're not using.
Well, if I go into they've got like a um how is it license packaging and pricing guide, and the first thing is the hardware is purchased directly from the hardware vendor. A complete list of Azure Stack Hub hardware partners can be found on the web, basically. So it does look like that you buy the hardware anyway, and then you pay a fee on top of it to run Stack on top, basically. But
Okay.
again, I don't really know, because I think the pay as you use is like the subscription billing model in Azure for actually using it, if that makes sense. Because if you think about it, one V core for £5 a month is very, very, very cheap, isn't it? If you compare
Yeah, that
that
is
to
true. Okay.
Azure, I could be talking complete nonsense, by the way, because, and if anybody is out there that's ever deployed or operated Azure Stack Hub, please get in contact, because it would be great to have you on the podcast for sure. Because yeah, but it does say that you can have a capacity model, but I think that's just for like the service on top of the hardware, basically.
Right.
because
Okay.
I assume this must be racks. Like this is like, and I'm not just talking like one rack. I'm talking like a bank of racks, right? It's if you're deploying this, you must have. I would assume you would have that level of hardware requirement, right? You know. Um, but yeah, okay. That's pretty much me on Azure Stack. We've been going 57 minutes. Wow! If anybody's got to the end of
Yep.
this, well done. Yeah, so hopefully that gave everybody sort of a little teaser into Azure Stack. Any other questions, Alan, or anything? Or are you just going to spend the next 3 nights trying to find out all the different
Try and find
stuff?
some hardware to test it out
Yes,
on. Yeah.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
no, I've got no questions. Thank you, because I think you covered it very well.
Yeah, well,
Definitely.
I hope that my ramblings and everything sort of conveyed the main benefits of it, and it is just sort of a brain dump from my last few weeks of um but yeah, if I ever get it running on something, or I find one of those backpack, I'm going to set up an eBay alert for one of those machines, because somebody's bound to.
Just
Well,
want to test it out, and then
I just want to walk around with it on my backpack, and I don't know what I'd do with it, but
well, you won't get one, will you? Because it's hardware as a service, so it goes
yeah, but
back.
I'm just hoping that somebody won't return it, right? Like so it ends up on eBay. But yeah, no. So a little bit out of our our comfort zone, but yeah, cool technology, I think, definitely from Microsoft. If you've enjoyed this episode, actually, wait, we're not doing that part of this yet. We've got to tease the next episode, haven't we? Alan, what is the next episode that we're going to do?
So I'm going to talk about Azure Key Vault. So looking at securing your certificates and secrets, and and what the RBAC models are and things like that, because we sometimes get not caught out, but it's so good that sometimes we don't have access to the bits we need.
Yeah, we do love a key vault, don't we, Alan? That's for sure. So yeah, great service from Microsoft, and yeah, that should be a good episode. Key vault is great. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing if you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future. We have many more topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what will continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
You also have the ability to give us some feedback. Did you enjoy this episode? Disagree? Got any thoughts? Did we miss anything? Have you got part of this hardware that we can find some more information out from you? Please use the form to in our notes to leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Alan, and we'll catch you all in the next one. Cheers.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for a great episode, and speak to everyone soon. Bye.